I remember that Christmas morning as if it were yesterday, the smell of pine needles mixed with the faint aroma of damp earth, the chill in the air that made our breath visible as little white clouds, and the weight of expectation that hung heavier than the snowflakes beginning to fall outside. We were children, after all, and Christmas morning was supposed to be about one thing and one thing only: toys. Colorful, exciting, magical toys that would transport us to worlds we could only imagine. The presents under the tree were wrapped in bright paper with cheerful bows, their shapes mysterious but promising wonders we couldn't wait to discover. We had spent weeks making lists, circling items in catalogs, dropping subtle, and not so subtle, hints to anyone who would listen about what Santa or our parents should bring us that year. That morning, my siblings and I woke before dawn, our hearts pounding with a mixture of excitement and impatience. We tiptoed down the stairs, the familiar creaks in the floorboards like a secret code only we understood. The tree stood majestically in the corner, its lights twinkling like captured stars, casting a warm glow on the neatly wrapped packages beneath it. There were more presents than usual. It seemed an embarrassment of riches that made our young mouths water with anticipation. "This is going to be the best Christmas ever," my younger brother whispered, his eyes wide with wonder. We took our places on the floor, the traditional spots we'd claimed years before, and began the carefully orchestrated ritual of present selection. The largest box, naturally, went to me, the oldest. I tore through the paper with the practiced efficiency of a child who had done this many times before, my fingers eager to reveal the treasure within. But what emerged wasn't a remote-controlled car, a board game, or a new set of action figures. It was a turnip. A large, slightly knobby, unremarkable root vegetable with dirt still clinging to its crevices. I stared at it, confused, then glanced at my siblings, who were opening their own presents with similar expressions of bewilderment. Their gifts were turnips too. Not toys. Not books. Not sweaters. Turnips. The silence that followed was heavy with confusion and, if I'm being completely honest, a profound sense of disappointment. I remember looking at my parents, who stood watching us with expressions that were difficult to read, part amusement, part something else that I couldn't quite identify. The dreamlike quality of Christmas morning had suddenly evaporated, leaving behind only the stark reality of root vegetables where there should have been magic. My younger sister's lower lip began to tremble. My brother kicked at the carpet with his slipper, muttering something about how Santa must have made a mistake. That Christmas morning with turnips instead of toys has stayed with me through the decades, a vivid memory that continues to resurface every holiday season. It was, without a doubt, the strangest Christmas of my childhood, but as the years have passed, I've come to understand that it might have been the most meaningful one too. What began as a moment of childhood bewilderment and disappointment has transformed into a profound lesson about value, expectation, and the true meaning of celebration. I've often wondered about the psychology behind that unusual choice, what compelled my parents to substitute vegetables for toys, to deliberately shatter the Christmas narrative we had all bought into so completely. Was it a statement about materialism? A lesson in gratitude? Or was there something more personal, more rooted in our family history that I failed to understand as a child? The turnips, I would come to realize, were not just vegetables. They were vessels of meaning, carrying within them stories and values that would shape our family in ways I couldn't possibly have imagined at the time. As I grew older, I began to see that Christmas morning not as a singular event but as the beginning of a tradition, one that would be passed down, adapted, and reinterpreted through generations. The turnips became more than just a memory. They became a symbol, a touchstone that our family would return to year after year when the holiday season threatened to become too commercial, too focused on the things rather than the meaning. They represented a deliberate choice to find joy in the unexpected, to appreciate the simple gifts that life offers, and to remember that sometimes the most valuable presents come in the most unexpected packages. That Christmas morning with turnips taught me something fundamental about celebration and tradition: that meaning is not inherent in objects or rituals, but is created through intention, reflection, and shared experience. The turnips themselves were unremarkable. What mattered was the conversation they sparked, the values they represented, and the way they brought our family together in a moment of collective realization. In a world that increasingly tells us that happiness comes from acquiring more, that Christmas is about getting the right presents, that tradition means doing things exactly the same way every year, that Christmas morning with turnips stands as a quiet rebellion, a reminder that sometimes the most meaningful gifts are the ones that challenge our expectations. As I reflect on that distant Christmas morning, I'm struck by how it has influenced my own approach to the holiday season, and indeed, to the concept of gift-giving itself. The turnips taught me that the most precious presents are often not the ones we can wrap in paper and tie with bows, but the ones that nourish our spirits, connect us to our values, and remind us of what truly matters. They taught me that sometimes, the most memorable gifts are the ones that initially seem like a mistake, but which ultimately reveal themselves to be profound lessons in disguise. That Christmas morning with turnips was, in many ways, the beginning of my understanding that celebration is not about perfection or abundance, but about presence, being fully present with the people we love, appreciating the moment for what it is, and finding joy in the unexpected. It was a lesson that would serve me well in the years to come, as I navigated the complexities of growing up, building my own family, and creating traditions of my own. Dear viewer, check if you're still subscribed to the channel. Sometimes subscriptions can be automatically cancelled, so it's always good to double-check. Also, consider becoming a channel member. As a member, you'll enjoy amazing benefits like watching our content ad-free. Plus, you can support our work by becoming a channel backer with a thanks contribution. Your help allows us to invest in better tools and raise the quality of our productions even further. Join us on this journey and become part of our community. Oh, and don't forget to comment with the city you're listening from and what time it is there. We'd love to know. Querido espectador, confira se você ainda está inscrito no canal. Às vezes, a inscrição pode ser cancelada automaticamente, então é sempre bom verificar. Aproveite e se torne um membro do canal. Como membro, você terá benefícios incríveis, como assistir aos nossos conteúdos sem anúncios. Além disso, você pode apoiar nosso trabalho sendo um financiador do canal com um "Valeu". Sua ajuda nos permite investir em ferramentas melhores e elevar a qualidade da produção dos nossos conteúdos. Junte-se a nós nessa jornada e faça parte da nossa comunidade. Ah, e conta pra gente aí nos comentários de que cidade você está escutando esta história e que horas são por aí agora. The tradition of turnips at Christmas wasn't something my parents invented out of thin air, though it certainly felt that way to us children on that fateful morning. It had deep roots in our family history, stretching back generations to ancestors I would only come to know through stories and faded photographs. As I grew older and began asking questions about this peculiar practice, I uncovered a rich tapestry of meaning that had been woven into our family celebration of Christmas long before I was born. My grandmother, a woman with eyes as sharp as a hawk and hands that could coax life from the most stubborn soil, was the keeper of these stories. She would sit in her worn rocking chair, the same one that had been passed down through 3 generations, and tell us about the Christmases of her childhood in the rural hills of our ancestral homeland. In the old country, she'd begin, her voice taking on the rhythmic cadence of a storyteller, Christmas wasn't about what you received, but what you had survived together. Her childhood Christmases were marked by scarcity, not abundance. The winters were harsh, the land unforgiving, and survival was a daily concern. Yet, in the midst of such hardship, the community found ways to celebrate that centered on gratitude for what they had rather than lamenting what they lacked. The turnip, she explained, was a symbol of this resilience. It was a humble root vegetable that could be stored through the winter, providing sustenance when other foods were scarce. In a society where food security was uncertain, the turnip represented survival, abundance, and the miracle of growth from the dark earth. In my family, my grandmother would say, her eyes misting with memory, we would plant turnips in the spring, and by Christmas, they would be ready to harvest. The largest, most perfect turnips would be set aside, not to be eaten immediately, but to be given as gifts. To give someone a turnip was to wish them prosperity, to acknowledge the hard work of the growing season, and to share in the hope that the coming year would bring abundance. This practice, I learned, wasn't unique to our family. In many rural communities across Europe and other parts of the world, turnips and other root vegetables played a central role in winter celebrations. They were symbols of the earth's generosity, of the cycle of growth and harvest, and of the community's interdependence. In a world before supermarkets and global supply chains, food was a precious commodity, and sharing it especially during the darkest, coldest time of year was an act of profound significance. My parents had carried this tradition forward, though not without some modifications. They had grown up in a time of greater prosperity than their parents, and they had experienced the pull of modern consumer culture. Yet, they had made a conscious decision to incorporate this ancestral practice into their celebration of Christmas, not as a rejection of modernity, but as a way to ground their family in values that had sustained their ancestors through difficult times. The turnips, my father explained one year when I was old enough to ask the real questions, are a reminder. They remind us of where we come from, of the struggles and triumphs of those who came before us. They remind us that true abundance isn't measured in material possessions, but in the richness of our connections to each other and to the earth that sustains us. My mother added her perspective, her voice softer but no less firm. They also teach us gratitude, she said. In a world that constantly tells us we need more, the turnips ask us to appreciate what we have. To find joy in the simple things. To recognize that sometimes the greatest gifts aren't the ones that come wrapped in paper, but the ones that nourish our souls. As a child, of course, I couldn't fully grasp these meanings. The turnips were just vegetables, symbols of a world I didn't understand. But as I grew older and began to appreciate the complexity of our family's history, I came to see the turnips as more than just roots from the ground. They were vessels of memory, carriers of wisdom, and tangible connections to a past that had shaped who we were becoming. The tradition wasn't without its evolution. In the early years, my parents kept it simple, just the turnips, perhaps with a small toy or book as a concession to modern expectations. But as the years went by, and as my siblings and I began to understand the significance of the practice, the tradition grew richer and more meaningful. We would spend the weeks leading up to Christmas learning about the history of the turnip in our family's culture, researching its symbolic significance, and even growing our own in a small garden plot we maintained just for this purpose. The night before Christmas became a special time of preparation. We would carefully clean the turnips, removing the dirt but leaving enough to remind us of their earthy origins. We might carve small designs into their surfaces, or tie ribbons around their stems. Each turnip became a unique work of art, a testament to the care and intention we poured into this unusual gift. On Christmas morning, the unwrapping took on a different character. There was still excitement, but it was tempered with understanding. We approached the turnips not with the wild anticipation of toys, but with the quiet reverence of something sacred. We would examine each turnip, appreciating its unique shape, its color, its texture. We would share stories about what this particular turnip might symbolize, or what wish we had for the person receiving it. The turnips, we discovered, had a way of bringing us together in ways that expensive toys never could. They sparked conversations that lasted long after the wrapping paper had been discarded. They prompted reflections on gratitude, on abundance, on what truly matters in life. They created a space for genuine connection, for shared values, for the kind of intimacy that material gifts rarely facilitate. As I reflect on those later Christmases, I realize that the turnips had become more than just a tradition. They had become a lens through which we viewed the world. They taught us to look beyond the surface, to find meaning in the seemingly ordinary, to appreciate the gifts that come in unexpected packages. They reminded us that sometimes the most profound lessons are taught through the simplest acts. Looking back, I can see now that the turnip tradition wasn't just about rejecting materialism or making some kind of statement. It was about creating meaning. It was about infusing our celebration of Christmas with values that mattered to our family: gratitude, resilience, connection to our heritage, appreciation for the earth's bounty. It was about remembering that Christmas, at its core, is about hope and renewal, about the light that persists even in the darkest times. And yet, for all this understanding, there was still that first Christmas, the one where turnips replaced toys, where childhood dreams collided with adult intentions, where the magic of Santa Claus collided with the reality of family tradition. That morning, with its mixture of confusion, disappointment, and nascent understanding, would become the touchstone against which all our other Christmases would be measured. It was the beginning of a journey, one that would take us through changing times, evolving traditions, and growing wisdom. A journey that would teach us that sometimes, the most unusual gifts are the ones that ultimately teach us the most about what truly matters in life. Little did I know, that first turnip Christmas was just the opening chapter in a story that would continue to unfold for years to come, touching lives in ways I couldn't possibly imagine at the time. The seeds of that morning, both literal and metaphorical, had been planted, and in the seasons that followed, they would grow into something far more beautiful and enduring than any toy could ever be. I would come to understand that the turnips were just the beginning. They were the roots from which a deeper, more meaningful understanding of family, tradition, and celebration would grow. But that understanding would only come with time, with reflection, and with the kind of perspective that distance can provide. In the immediate aftermath of that first turnip Christmas, however, all I could feel was the sting of disappointment, a confusion that would soon give way to a realization that would change my understanding of Christmas forever. That particular Christmas morning started no differently from any other in our household, at least not in the early hours before dawn. The anticipation had been building for weeks, perhaps even months. My siblings and I had constructed elaborate fantasies about the treasures awaiting us beneath the tree. This was the year we believed our dreams would finally come true: my younger brother's desperate plea for a remote-controlled helicopter that could actually fly, my sister's quiet hope for a doll with real hair that could be brushed and styled, my own desperate wish for a brand-new bicycle that would make me the envy of every kid on the block. The night before, we had carefully arranged the presents beneath the tree, each one tagged with our names in my mother's elegant handwriting. We had counted them, tallied them, compared them to our lists. There were more presents than ever before, a veritable mountain of wrapped promises that seemed to guarantee our happiness. We went to bed with stomachs fluttering with excitement, visions of sugar plums replaced by visions of the morning's grand unwrapping. When dawn came, we were ready. We woke before our parents, before the sun had even begun to peek over the horizon, and tiptoed downstairs to take our positions around the tree. The air was crisp and cold, but the room felt warm with anticipation. The lights on the tree cast dancing shadows on the walls, creating a magical atmosphere that seemed to promise wonders beyond our wildest dreams. "Remember the rules," I whispered to my younger siblings, adopting the serious tone of the eldest. "One present at a time. No ripping paper. And we have to admire each gift before moving on to the next." My younger brother, Tommy, who was 7 at the time, bounced on his heels with impatience. "Can I open the biggest one first? Please?" My sister, Sarah, who was 9, nodded solemnly. "We should draw straws. That's the fairest way." We did draw straws, and Tommy, in a rare stroke of luck, got to choose first. His eyes scanned the presents, his gaze landing on the largest box, which had his name written in bold letters on the tag. With trembling fingers, he carefully untied the bow and began to peel back the paper. The shape beneath was strange, long and rounded, not at all like the rectangular box a remote-controlled helicopter would come in. Tommy frowned, his brow furrowing in confusion. He worked more quickly now, ripping away the paper with increasing urgency until the gift was completely revealed. Silence. There on the floor, where a magnificent flying machine should have been, sat a turnip. A large, knobby, dirt-caked turnip with a green leafy top still attached. Tommy stared at it, his mouth slightly agape, his expression shifting from confusion to disbelief to dawning horror. "That's not my helicopter," he whispered, his voice trembling. "Where's my helicopter?" Before any of us could respond, Sarah had opened her present, revealing a turnip nearly identical to Tommy's. Her lower lip began to tremble, and tears welled in her eyes. But I wanted the doll," she choked out, looking from the turnip to my parents, who stood watching with expressions that seemed both amused and uncomfortable. My own present, when I finally opened it, proved to be the same. A turnip. Not the bicycle I had dreamed of, not even a book or a game or a piece of clothing. Just a turnip. A root vegetable that belonged in the garden, not under the Christmas tree. The disappointment was a physical weight in the room, pressing down on us all. I could feel my own tears threatening to spill, but I fought them back, trying to maintain the composure of the oldest child. This wasn't right. This wasn't Christmas. This was some kind of cruel joke. "What is this?" I finally managed to ask, my voice tight with emotion. "Where are our real presents?" My father stepped forward, his expression serious now. "These are your presents," he said simply. But they're vegetables," Tommy exclaimed, kicking at his turnip with his slipper. "Santa doesn't bring vegetables. Santa brings toys." My mother knelt down beside us, her voice gentle but firm. "Santa brings many things," she said. "And sometimes, the most special gifts aren't the ones we expect." I remember looking around the room, at the faces of my siblings, at the carefully wrapped presents that now seemed like taunts, at the expressions on my parents' faces that I couldn't quite decipher. The magic had evaporated, leaving only confusion and hurt feelings. This wasn't the Christmas we had dreamed of, not by a long shot. "Can we at least open another present?" Sarah pleaded, her voice small and pleading. "Please." My father nodded reluctantly. "But remember," he said, "these are your gifts. We should appreciate them." We opened the remaining presents, one by one, each revealing another turnip. 8 turnips in total, one for each member of our family. By the time we were done, the floor was littered with root vegetables, and the disappointment had curdled into resentment. We sat in a circle of dejection, staring at our turnips as if they had personally betrayed us. My mother tried to explain. "In my family," she said, "we used to give turnips as gifts. It's an old tradition, from my grandparents' homeland. The turnip represents abundance, gratitude. But we weren't listening. We were children, after all, and our world had been turned upside down." Tommy was openly crying now, his sobs echoing in the suddenly quiet room. Sarah had retreated to a corner, hugging her knees to her chest. I sat staring at my turnip, trying to understand how this could be happening, how this could be considered a gift. Then, something unexpected happened. My grandmother, who had been watching silently from her armchair, spoke up. "Your grandfather used to tell us a story about the Christmas turnip," she said, her voice soft but carrying across the room. "In the old country, during the hardest times, people would give turnips as gifts because they represented survival. A turnip could be planted, grown, and would provide food for a family when there was nothing else. To give a turnip was to give life itself." She paused, looking at each of us in turn. "The turnip," she continued, "teaches us that true abundance isn't about what we can buy in a store, but about what we can grow with our own hands, with patience and care." As she spoke, something shifted in the room. The disappointment didn't disappear, not right away, but it began to mix with something else. Curiosity. A flicker of understanding. I looked at my turnip, not with resentment now, but with a dawning realization that there might be more to this strange gift than met the eye. My grandmother reached into her pocket and pulled out a small knife. "Would you like me to show you something?" she asked. Without waiting for an answer, she took my turnip and began to carve it. With careful, precise movements, she transformed the ordinary root vegetable into something beautiful, a small bird with delicate wings and a graceful neck. The tears in my eyes began to fade, replaced by wonder as I watched my grandmother's hands work their magic. One by one, she carved each of our turnips into different shapes: a flower, a star, a heart, a tiny house. Each one was unique, each one transformed from something ordinary into something extraordinary. "See," my grandmother said, holding up the bird she had carved from my turnip, "even from something simple, something unexpected, beauty can emerge." Sometimes, the greatest gifts are the ones that challenge us to look beyond the surface, to find meaning in what seems ordinary. As I looked at my carved turnip bird, I began to understand. Not completely, not the way an adult would understand, but enough to feel the sting of disappointment easing, replaced by a dawning appreciation for the thought and meaning behind this unusual gift. That Christmas morning with turnips instead of toys was, without a doubt, the strangest Christmas of my childhood. But as I sat there, surrounded by my family, watching as my grandmother showed us how to find beauty in the unexpected, something important began to take root in my heart, a seed of understanding that would grow in the seasons and years to come. I still didn't have the bicycle I had dreamed of, but somehow, that didn't seem quite as important anymore. My turnip, carved into the shape of a bird, sat in my hands, warm and solid and real. It wasn't a toy that would break or lose its appeal after a few weeks. It was something more, something that carried within it stories, traditions, and a lesson that I would carry with me long after the memory of that strange Christmas morning had faded. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of a journey that would take us through changing times, evolving traditions, and growing wisdom. A journey that would teach us that sometimes, the most unusual gifts are the ones that ultimately teach us the most about what truly matters in life. The turnips were just the start, a single chapter in a story that would unfold in ways I couldn't possibly imagine at that moment. The real gift, I would come to understand, wasn't the vegetable itself, but the conversation it sparked, the values it represented, and the way it brought our family together in a moment of collective realization. In a world that tells us happiness comes from getting more, that Christmas morning with turnips stood as a quiet rebellion, a reminder that sometimes the most meaningful gifts are the ones that challenge our expectations, forcing us to look beyond the surface and discover the extraordinary hidden within the ordinary. That was the year Christmas changed for me, not because of what I received, but because of how I learned to see. And as I looked around the room at my siblings, now examining their carved turnips with fascination rather than disappointment, I knew that this strange Christmas would stay with me long after the toys of other years had been forgotten. The most precious gifts, I was beginning to understand, aren't the ones we can wrap in paper and tie with bows, but the ones that nourish our spirits, connect us to our values, and remind us of what truly matters. Sometimes, those gifts come in the most unexpected packages. In the days that followed that first turnip Christmas, something remarkable began to happen. The disappointment that had hung heavy in the air on Christmas morning gradually gave way to curiosity, and then to something that surprised even my parents: genuine appreciation. The initial bewilderment had been replaced by a dawning understanding that these weren't just vegetables, but vessels of meaning that carried within them stories and values we were only beginning to comprehend. It started with my grandmother. After the initial shock had worn off, she gathered us around the kitchen table, where our turnips sat like silent witnesses to the unusual gift exchange. "Each turnip tells a story," she said, her eyes sparkling with the enthusiasm of a storyteller. She picked up my turnip, which she had carved into the shape of a bird. "This one," she explained, "represents freedom. Just as a bird can soar above the earth, unaffected by its limitations, so too can our spirits rise above circumstances." She moved on to Tommy's turnip, which she had carved into a small airplane. "This one represents adventure. Even when we feel grounded by our circumstances, we can always imagine new horizons, dream of places we might go." Sarah's turnip, carved into a heart, was next. "This represents love," my grandmother said gently. "Love that endures, that nourishes, that sustains us even when other things fail." As she spoke, I found myself looking at my turnip bird with new eyes. It wasn't just a vegetable anymore, it was a symbol, a tangible reminder of values that mattered more than any toy could. My grandmother explained how, in her ancestral homeland, turnips were more than just food. They were a currency of sorts, a way of measuring wealth and prosperity. A family's wealth was often determined by how many turnips they could store through the winter, how successfully they could cultivate them, how generously they could share them with others. To give someone a turnip, my grandmother explained, was to give them sustenance, yes, but also hope. It was to say, may you never go hungry. May your land be fertile. May your life be abundant. This was a concept that was completely foreign to us, children growing up in a world of supermarkets and abundance. We took for granted that food would always be available, that our needs would always be met. The turnip, with its earthy aroma and unassuming appearance, became a bridge between our comfortable modern existence and the more precarious existence of our ancestors. My parents watched as my grandmother shared these stories, their expressions softening with each word. I could see in their eyes a mixture of pride and relief, pride that this tradition was being passed down with such care, relief that the initial disappointment was giving way to understanding. Over the next few days, we began to explore the significance of the turnip in new ways. My father, who had been somewhat hesitant about the whole tradition, surprised us by bringing out an old photo album. Flipping through the yellowed pages, he showed us pictures of his own childhood Christmases, where turnips had played a central role. In my family, he said, the turnip represented resilience. My parents grew up during the Depression, when food was scarce. Christmas wasn't about abundance, it was about making do with what you had, about finding joy in simple things. The turnip was a reminder of that resilience, of the ability to find hope even in difficult times. He pointed to a photo of his grandmother holding a particularly large turnip, her face weathered but proud. This woman, he said, survived 2 world wars, a depression, and the loss of more children than she kept. Yet every Christmas, she would give turnips as gifts, not out of necessity, but out of choice. She wanted us to remember that true strength comes not from what we have, but from who we are. As my father spoke, I found myself looking at my turnip bird with a new sense of respect. It wasn't just a vegetable, it was a symbol of the strength and resilience that had run through our family for generations. It represented the ability to endure hardship, to find joy in simplicity, to maintain hope even in the darkest times. My mother added her own perspective, gathering us in the living room one evening as the winter storm raged outside. The turnip, she said, represents connection. Connection to the earth, to our ancestors, to each other. In a world that often feels fragmented and disconnected, the turnip reminds us of our fundamental interdependence. She explained how, in her family, the tradition of giving turnips had been about more than just the physical gift. It had been about acknowledging our connection to the natural world, to the cycles of growth and harvest that sustained life. It had been about recognizing that our well-being was tied to the well-being of the land, and to the community that depended on it. To give someone a turnip, my mother said, was to acknowledge that we are all part of something larger than ourselves. It was to say, we are in this together. Your well-being matters to me. This was a powerful message, especially for children who were still learning about their place in the world. The turnips, with their earthy aroma and unassuming appearance, became a tangible reminder of these connections to our ancestors, to the earth, to each other. As the days turned into weeks, we began to appreciate the turnips in new ways. We learned about their nutritional value, discovering that they were rich in vitamin C, fiber, and other nutrients. We learned about their versatility in cooking, experimenting with recipes from my grandmother's homeland. We learned about their place in folklore and mythology, discovering stories from around the world that featured this humble root vegetable. Most importantly, we learned about their symbolic significance. The turnip, we discovered, represented more than just food or tradition. It represented values that had sustained our family through generations: gratitude for what we have, resilience in the face of hardship, connection to something larger than ourselves, and the ability to find joy in simplicity. By the time Christmas had passed and the new year had begun, something remarkable had happened. The turnips, which had initially been a source of confusion and disappointment, had become cherished symbols of our family's values. We had learned to look beyond their unassuming appearance to discover the hidden riches they contained, riches of meaning, of connection, of wisdom. One evening, as we sat around the kitchen table sharing a meal that included turnips prepared in various ways, my father looked around at us with a smile. "Who would have thought," he said, "that a simple root vegetable could teach us so much?" My grandmother nodded, her eyes twinkling. "The most profound lessons," she said, "often come in the simplest packages. They are the ones that stay with us longest, the ones that shape who we become." As I looked around the table at my family, at the turnips that had become such an integral part of our Christmas celebration, I realized something important. The turnips weren't just gifts, they were teachers. They had taught us lessons about gratitude, about resilience, about connection, lessons that would stay with us long after the memory of that unusual Christmas morning had faded. And as I sat there, surrounded by my family, sharing stories and laughter around the simple meal I had once been so disappointed to receive, I understood something else. The most precious gifts aren't the ones we can wrap in paper and tie with bows, but the ones that nourish our spirits, connect us to our values, and remind us of what truly matters. Sometimes, those gifts come in the most unexpected packages that, once opened, reveal hidden treasures beyond our wildest imagination. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of a journey that would take us through changing times, evolving traditions, and growing wisdom. A journey that would teach us that sometimes, the most unusual gifts are the ones that ultimately teach us the most about what truly matters in life. The turnips were just the start, a single chapter in a story that would unfold in ways I couldn't possibly imagine at that moment. The real gift, I was beginning to understand, wasn't the vegetable itself, but the conversation it sparked, the values it represented, and the way it brought our family together in a moment of collective realization. But with all traditions, as families grow and circumstances change, even the most meaningful practices must adapt. And so, as the years passed and our family evolved, so too did our turnip tradition, transforming in ways that would test its resilience and deepen its significance in ways we never could have anticipated. As the years passed and our family dynamics shifted, the turnip tradition evolved in ways that surprised even my parents. What began as a somewhat radical experiment in gift-giving had become a cornerstone of our family identity, yet it wasn't static, it grew and adapted along with us, taking on new dimensions as our circumstances changed. The tradition proved remarkably resilient, bending without breaking to accommodate the various seasons of our family life. When I became a teenager and started developing my own sense of identity, I went through a phase where I was embarrassed by the turnip tradition. Couldn't we just have a normal Christmas? I complained one year, as my mother carefully selected the turnips from the garden. You know, with actual presents? My mother looked at me, her expression neither angry nor hurt, but understanding. The turnips aren't instead of presents, she said gently. They're a different kind of present. One that reminds us of who we are, where we come from. That conversation stayed with me, and as I navigated the turbulent waters of adolescence, I began to appreciate the turnips in new ways. They became a touchstone, a reminder of values that mattered more than the latest fashion or gadget. When my friends were talking about their expensive Christmas presents, I found myself reflecting on the deeper meaning of our tradition, on the resilience and gratitude it represented. When I left for college, I was worried the tradition might fade without me there to participate. But my parents, ever resourceful, adapted. They sent me a carefully packaged turnip in the mail, along with a letter explaining its significance. Even when you're far from home, my mother wrote, you carry these values with you. The turnip is a reminder of the strength that runs in our blood. That turnip sat on my dorm desk throughout the holiday season, a silent connection to my family and my heritage. I took a photo of it and sent it to my siblings, who were also participating in the tradition from their own college dorms. We video called on Christmas morning, each of us holding our turnips, sharing stories and laughter across the miles. The tradition had transformed, but its essence remained intact. When I met my wife and we started building our own family, I worried about how to incorporate this unusual tradition into a new household. Would she think it strange? Would our children be confused? To my surprise, my wife embraced the idea with enthusiasm. Every family needs unique traditions, she said. Something that makes them stand out, that gives their children stories to tell. Our first Christmas together presented a new challenge, how to honor both our family traditions. After much discussion, we decided to create a hybrid approach. We would give turnips as gifts, but we would also incorporate elements from my wife's family traditions. The result was a celebration that honored both our heritages while creating something new for our own family. As our children grew, the tradition continued to evolve. When they were toddlers, we kept it simple, just small, clean turnips with ribbons tied around them. As they got older, we began to incorporate more of the educational aspects my grandmother had emphasized, teaching them about the turnip's significance in our family history and cultural heritage. One year, when our oldest was about 8, we decided to make the tradition more interactive. Rather than just receiving turnips, our children helped select and prepare them. We took a trip to a local farm where they could choose their own turnips, learning about how they grow and the care that goes into cultivating them. Back home, we spent an afternoon cleaning, carving, and decorating them, turning the process into a family craft activity. The following year, we added another dimension, giving turnips to others. We selected a few families in our community who might be struggling during the holiday season and delivered baskets containing not just turnips, but also other necessities. The turnip represents abundance, we explained to our children, but abundance is meant to be shared. That's why we give them to others who might need a reminder that they are not alone. This new element transformed the tradition from something purely personal to something outward-looking. Our children began to understand that the turnips weren't just about our family's values, but about extending those values to the wider community. They learned that true abundance isn't measured in what we accumulate, but in what we share. When economic hardship struck our family, a period of unemployment and financial uncertainty, I worried that the turnip tradition might feel like a cruel joke. How could we celebrate abundance when we were struggling? To my surprise, the tradition became more meaningful than ever during that difficult time. Our children, now teenagers, had developed a deep appreciation for the turnip's symbolic significance. "This is exactly when we need this tradition," our oldest daughter said one evening as we prepared for what promised to be a lean Christmas. "The turnips remind us that abundance isn't about money. It's about what we have that money can't buy: family, love, resilience." That year, we took the tradition to another level. Rather than focusing on what we lacked, we focused on what we had. Each family member wrote down things they were grateful for, placing the notes in a bowl along with the turnips. On Christmas morning, we read them aloud, creating a tapestry of appreciation that warmed our hearts more than any expensive gift could have. As our circumstances improved, the tradition continued to evolve. We began incorporating elements from other cultures, learning how different communities around the world use root vegetables in their winter celebrations. We discovered that many cultures have similar traditions, gifting foods that represent abundance, sharing what we have with others, finding joy in simplicity. We also began documenting the tradition, creating scrapbooks and videos that captured our evolving celebration. These became precious family heirlooms, chronicling not just the turnips themselves, but the changing faces of our family, the growing children, the shifting dynamics, the wisdom gained through years of celebration. When my parents grew older and could no longer tend to their garden, we adapted once again. We began sourcing turnips from local farmers markets, ensuring that the tradition could continue even as my parents' physical limitations changed. The turnips themselves might come from different soil, tended by different hands, but they carried the same symbolic significance. One year, when my father's health was declining, the tradition took on new meaning. As we gathered around the Christmas tree, each holding a turnip, my father spoke about what the tradition had come to mean to him. "I never imagined," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "that a simple vegetable could become such an important part of our family. But it has. It's connected us across generations, across miles, across time. It's reminded us of what truly matters." As my father spoke, I looked around at my family, my siblings, my children, my nieces and nephews, and realized something profound. The turnip tradition had become more than just a Christmas practice. It had become a living embodiment of our family's values, a tangible expression of the things we hold dear. It had adapted, transformed, evolved with our changing circumstances, but its core essence remained intact: gratitude for what we have, resilience in the face of hardship, connection to something larger than ourselves. What struck me most was how this seemingly simple tradition had proven so adaptable. It had survived my teenage embarrassment, my departure for college, my marriage, the birth of our children, economic hardship, my parents' aging. It had evolved without losing its meaning, adapting to each new challenge while remaining true to its original purpose. The turnips had become a thread running through the tapestry of our family life, connecting past to present, generation to generation, circumstance to circumstance. They had taught us that tradition isn't about rigidly repeating the past, but about carrying forward the values that matter most, adapting them to the present, and passing them on to the future. As I held my turnip that Christmas, I marveled at its journey from the earth to our family, to the hearts and minds of those who had learned to see beyond its humble appearance to discover the hidden treasures within. I wondered what forms this tradition might take in the future, as our family continued to grow and change, as new generations added their own interpretations and adaptations. Little did I know, the next chapter of this journey would bring the turnip tradition to an even wider audience, transforming it from a family practice into something that would touch lives in ways we never could have imagined. The seeds planted on that first unusual Christmas morning had grown into something far more beautiful and enduring than anyone had anticipated, and the story was far from over. As the years turned into decades, the turnip tradition evolved from a peculiar family practice into something far greater, a living legacy that transcended our immediate family and touched the lives of countless others. What began as an unusual Christmas morning had blossomed into a cornerstone of our family identity, a story that would be told and retold at gatherings, shared with friends, and eventually passed down through generations in ways we never could have anticipated. The first inkling that our tradition was becoming something more significant came when I was in my 30s, attending a family reunion where relatives from across the country had gathered. As we went around the circle sharing updates on our lives, someone inevitably mentioned the turnip Christmas. To my surprise, nearly every cousin, aunt, and uncle had a story to tell, some of fond memories, others of initial confusion that later gave way to understanding. "I still have my turnip," my cousin Mark said, reaching into his pocket and pulling out a small, carefully carved turnip that was nearly 20 years old. "It's sitting on my desk at work. On stressful days, I look at it and remember what's important. His revelation sparked a flurry of similar stories. My Aunt Margaret, always the practical one, shared how she had incorporated turnips into her own family celebrations, though with some modifications to suit her children's interests. They get one small gift each, she explained, but the turnip is always there. It's become our way of remembering what Christmas is really about. As the conversation continued, I began to see the turnip tradition not just as a practice we shared, but as a shared language, a way of communicating values that transcended individual preferences or circumstances. No matter where we were in life, what challenges we faced, or how different our celebrations had become, the turnip remained a common thread connecting us all. The tradition took on new dimensions as our family expanded through marriages and births. When my siblings married, their spouses initially viewed the turnip tradition with the same bewilderment we children had shown all those years ago. But just as we had gradually come to appreciate its significance, so too did they. My sister-in-law, who came from a family that valued material possessions, admitted that the turnips had fundamentally changed her approach to gift-giving. I used to stress about getting the perfect presents, she shared one Christmas Eve. But the turnips taught me that sometimes the most meaningful gifts aren't things at all. Last year, instead of buying my mother another sweater she wouldn't wear, I took her on a weekend trip to a place she'd always wanted to visit. It cost less than the sweater would have, but meant so much more. Her words resonated with the entire room, reminding us that the legacy of the turnip wasn't just about the vegetable itself, but about the shift in perspective it had inspired in all of us. As our parents aged, the turnip tradition took on additional layers of meaning. One Christmas, when my father's health was declining, we gathered around him as he shared the story of the first turnip Christmas. "I never imagined," he said, his voice raspy with emotion, "that such a simple thing could become so important to our family. But looking around this room, seeing all of you, knowing that this tradition has been passed down, it's the greatest gift I could ever receive." That Christmas, we did something new. Instead of just giving turnips to each other, we created a turnip journal, a book where family members could write down their memories, reflections, and hopes for the future. We passed the journal around the room, each person adding their thoughts, creating a tangible legacy that would be added to for generations to come. The tradition continued to evolve as our children grew and developed their own understanding of its significance. When our oldest daughter went away to college, she took a turnip with her, not just any turnip, but one she had helped select and carve from our garden. "It's my touchstone," she explained. "When things get stressful or I feel overwhelmed, I look at it and remember what matters." Years later, when she became a mother herself, she incorporated the turnip tradition into her own family celebrations, though with her own unique spin. She combined it with another practice from her mother-in-law's family, creating memory ornaments each year that represented something meaningful from the past year. The result was a celebration that honored both heritages while creating something new for her own family. What surprised me most was how this family tradition began to influence our community. One year, when our children were in elementary school, they decided to share the story of the turnip Christmas with their classmates. Their teacher, intrigued by the concept, invited me to speak to the class about the tradition and its significance. I wasn't sure how 8-year-olds would respond to a story about vegetables instead of toys, but to my surprise, they were fascinated. They asked thoughtful questions about the meaning behind the turnips, about how we had come to adopt this tradition, and about what it represented. After my talk, the teacher incorporated the turnip concept into a lesson about gratitude and appreciation for non-material gifts. The following year, the class created their own turnip journal, where students wrote about things they were grateful for. The project was so successful that it spread to other classes, then to other schools in the district. Soon, what had begun as a family tradition had blossomed into a community practice that touched the lives of hundreds of children. As our children grew and became adults, they carried the turnip tradition with them, adapting it to their own circumstances and relationships. One of our sons, who lived in a small apartment in the city, couldn't grow his own turnips, so he began a tradition of giving urban turnips, small potted plants that could be grown on a windowsill. Another daughter, who was an artist, began carving intricate designs into turnips, turning them into edible art that she gave as gifts. The most unexpected evolution came when our family decided to create a documentary about the turnip tradition. What began as a simple family project grew into something larger as we interviewed relatives, friends, and community members about their experiences with the tradition. The documentary, titled The Turnip Christmas, was shown at several local film festivals and eventually picked up by a streaming service, introducing our family's peculiar practice to audiences around the world. The response was overwhelming. We received letters and emails from people who had been inspired by our story to create their own meaningful traditions. Some had adopted the turnip tradition in their own families, adapting it to their cultural backgrounds and circumstances. Others had been inspired to simplify their celebrations, focusing more on connection and less on materialism. Still others had been reminded to appreciate the simple things in life, to find joy in the unexpected, and to look beyond surface appearances to discover deeper meaning. One letter that particularly touched me came from a woman who had lost her home in a natural disaster and was struggling to find meaning in the holiday season. "Your story about the turnips," she wrote, "reminded me that even when I've lost everything, I still have my family, my memories, and my ability to find joy in simple things. This Christmas, instead of focusing on what I've lost, I'll be celebrating what I still have. Thank you for sharing your family story. It changed my perspective." As I read her letter, I was struck by how something that began as a small, unusual family tradition had rippled outward, touching lives in ways we never could have imagined. The turnips, which had started as a replacement for toys in a single Christmas morning, had become symbols of something far greater, the power of tradition to connect us, to teach us, and to remind us of what truly matters. Looking back on the journey of our turnip tradition, I'm struck by its resilience, its adaptability, and its enduring significance. It has survived misunderstandings, separations, changing circumstances, and the passage of time. It has evolved without losing its essence, adapting to each new generation while remaining true to the values it represents: gratitude, resilience, connection, and the ability to find joy in the unexpected. The turnips have become more than just gifts or symbols. They have become part of our family's DNA, encoded in our collective memory and passed down through stories, rituals, and shared experiences. They remind us that the most precious legacies aren't the ones we can measure in material wealth, but the ones that nourish our spirits, connect us to our values, and remind us of what truly matters. As I reflect on this unexpected legacy, I'm filled with gratitude for the ancestors who began this tradition, for the parents who carried it forward, for the children who have embraced and adapted it, and for the countless others whose lives have been touched by our story. The turnip Christmas has become more than just a family practice. It has become a way of life, a philosophy that guides how we approach not just the holiday season, but every day of the year. And yet, for all its significance, the turnip tradition continues to evolve, to grow, to take on new meanings as our family continues to change and expand. Little did we know that the simple act of giving turnips instead of toys would set in motion a chain reaction of meaning-making that would continue long after that first unusual Christmas morning had faded into memory. The story is far from over indeed. It's just entering its most exciting chapter yet, as the seeds planted all those years ago continue to bear fruit in ways we are only beginning to imagine. In today's world of hyper-commercialization and social media perfection, the turnip tradition offers a refreshing perspective on what Christmas can and perhaps should be about. As I watch our society's increasingly materialistic approach to the holiday season, with its Black Friday stampedes, extravagant gift exchanges, and Instagram-worthy displays, I often find myself reflecting on that first turnip Christmas and the profound lessons it taught us. The contrast between our family's experience and modern consumer culture couldn't be starker. While many families spend weeks agonizing over the perfect gifts, worrying whether they've spent enough or bought the right things, our turnip tradition reminds us that the most meaningful presents aren't necessarily the most expensive or elaborate. In a world that equates love with price tags, the turnips stand as quiet testimony to the fact that sometimes the greatest gifts are the ones that challenge our expectations, forcing us to look beyond material value to discover deeper meaning. I'm struck by how much the nature of gift-giving has changed since my childhood. When I was growing up, presents were often homemade or carefully chosen items that reflected the giver's knowledge of the recipient. Today, with the rise of online shopping and gift cards, the personal touch has often been lost. The turnip tradition, by contrast, requires intention and thoughtfulness. Selecting the right turnip, preparing it with care, and understanding its significance, these actions imbue the gift with meaning that no store-bought item could replicate. As our turnip tradition has evolved over the years, I've come to see it as a form of resistance against the commercialization of Christmas. In a culture that constantly tells us we need more, the turnips ask us to consider what we truly need. They remind us that abundance isn't measured in material possessions, but in the richness of our connections to each other and to the world around us. This message feels more relevant than ever in our consumerist society, where environmental concerns and economic inequality are increasingly pressing issues. The turnip tradition also challenges our modern obsession with perfection. Social media is filled with images of perfect Christmases, flawless decorations, elaborate meals, and mountains of beautifully wrapped gifts. Yet these idealized images often create unrealistic expectations and feelings of inadequacy. Our turnip Christmas, with its initial disappointment and eventual understanding, teaches us that imperfection can be beautiful, that unexpected gifts can be the most meaningful, and that authenticity matters more than appearance. One of the most powerful lessons from the turnip tradition is its emphasis on experience over possessions. Modern gift-giving often focuses on things: clothes, gadgets, jewelry. The turnips, by contrast, represent experiences, learning about family history, engaging in meaningful conversations, creating shared memories. In a world where experiences increasingly define us rather than our possessions, this shift from things to experiences feels particularly relevant. The tradition also challenges our throwaway culture. In an era of planned obsolescence and disposable everything, the turnips represent sustainability. They can be eaten, planted, or preserved. Nothing goes to waste. They connect us to natural cycles, reminding us that true abundance comes from working with nature rather than against it. This message feels increasingly important as we confront environmental challenges and seek more sustainable ways of living. Perhaps most importantly, the turnip tradition offers a counter-narrative to the individualism that characterizes modern society. In a culture that often prioritizes personal gain and individual achievement, the turnips emphasize community, connection, and shared values. They remind us that we are part of something larger than ourselves, that our well-being is intertwined with the well-being of others, with our communities, and with the natural world. As I've watched our turnip tradition evolve over the years, I've been struck by how it has adapted to changing circumstances while maintaining its core values. This adaptability offers an important lesson for anyone seeking to create meaningful traditions in today's rapidly changing world. The key, it seems, is not rigid adherence to specific practices, but to the underlying values they represent. When we focus on what matters most: connection, gratitude, resilience, we can create traditions that are both meaningful and flexible. The turnip tradition has also taught us about the power of stories. In a world of information overload, narratives have a unique ability to cut through the noise and touch our hearts. The story of the turnip Christmas has been shared and retold countless times, each telling reinforcing the values it represents and creating connections between generations. This oral tradition of storytelling feels particularly valuable in today's digital age, where authentic human connection can sometimes be lacking. Another important lesson is the tradition's emphasis on mindfulness. In our fast-paced world, we often rush through holidays, checking off boxes on a to-do list rather than truly being present. The turnip tradition encourages us to slow down, to savor each moment, to appreciate the simple things. It teaches us that the quality of our experience matters more than the quantity of our activities. The turnips have also given us a framework for talking about difficult topics. In a family setting, they provide a safe way to discuss issues like materialism, consumerism, and environmental concerns. By using the turnips as a starting point, we can explore these complex subjects in a non-confrontational manner, making them accessible even to children. Perhaps most importantly, the turnip tradition reminds us that Christmas is not just a single day but a season and attitude of mind that can extend throughout the year. The values it represents, gratitude, resilience, connection, are not just for December, they are for every day. In this sense, the turnip Christmas is not really about Christmas at all, it's about how we live our lives, what we value, and what we pass on to future generations. As I reflect on these lessons, I'm struck by how relevant they are to contemporary society. In a world grappling with climate change, economic inequality, and social division, the turnip tradition offers a vision of abundance that is not based on extraction but on appreciation, not on accumulation but on connection, not on consumption but on conservation. The turnips have become a lens through which we view the world, a framework for making decisions about how we live, what we value, and how we relate to each other. They remind us that true wealth is not measured in what we have, but in what we give away, not in how much we accumulate, but in how deeply we connect, not in the presents we receive, but in the presents we offer. In a culture that often tells us happiness comes from getting more, the turnips tell us that it comes from appreciating more. In a world that emphasizes speed and efficiency, they remind us of the value of slowness and intention. In a society that values novelty and trendiness, they celebrate the enduring power of tradition and meaning. These lessons feel particularly important as we navigate the challenges of the 21st century. In an increasingly complex and uncertain world, the turnip tradition offers a simple yet profound guide for living, guiding us toward what truly matters, connecting us to something larger than ourselves, and reminding us that sometimes the greatest gifts come in the most unexpected packages. As I think about the future of our turnip tradition, I'm excited to see how it will continue to evolve and what new meanings it will take on. But I'm also aware that its true value lies not in the tradition itself, but in the values it represents, values of gratitude, resilience, connection, and appreciation for the simple things that make life meaningful. The turnip Christmas has taught us that the most precious gifts are not the ones we can wrap in paper and tie with bows, but the ones that nourish our spirits, connect us to our values, and remind us of what truly matters. Sometimes, those gifts come in the most unexpected packages that, once opened, reveal hidden treasures beyond our wildest imagination. And as I hold my turnip this Christmas season, I'm reminded that the greatest gift of all is not what we receive, but the wisdom we gain through our experiences, the wisdom to see beyond appearances, to appreciate the simple things, and to find meaning in the unexpected gifts that life offers us all. The turnip tradition, with its humble beginnings and profound impact, stands as a quiet rebellion against a world that often values the shiny and new over the meaningful and enduring. It asks us to consider what we're truly celebrating during this holiday season, not just the exchange of gifts, but the exchange of values, not just the gathering of people, but the connection of hearts, not just the marking of time, but the making of meaning. In a world that often seems to have lost its way, perhaps it's time to return to the wisdom of the turnip, to remember that sometimes the most profound celebrations are the ones that challenge us to look deeper, to appreciate more, and to find joy in the unexpected gifts that life offers to all who are willing to see them. As I reflect on the journey of our turnip tradition from that confusing Christmas morning when vegetables replaced toys to the living legacy it has become, I'm struck by how something so simple could contain such profound wisdom. The turnips, with their unassuming appearance and earthy aroma, have become our family's greatest teachers, guiding us through decades of changing circumstances while remaining true to the values they represent. What strikes me most deeply is how this peculiar tradition has revealed that the most meaningful gifts often come wrapped in unexpected packages. The turnips taught us that true abundance isn't measured in material possessions but in the richness of our connections to each other, to our heritage, and to the natural world that sustains us. They reminded us that sometimes the greatest presents aren't the ones we can wrap in paper and tie with bows, but the ones that nourish our spirits, challenge our perspectives, and connect us to what truly matters. In a world that constantly tells us happiness comes from getting more, the turnips have stood as quiet testimony to a different truth, that joy often springs from appreciating more. They've taught us to look beyond surface appearances, to find meaning in the seemingly ordinary, and to discover beauty in unexpected places. These are lessons that extend far beyond the holiday season, offering guidance for how we might live our lives throughout the year. As I think about the turnip tradition's evolution from a family practice to something that has touched countless lives, I'm reminded that the most powerful legacies aren't the ones we leave in our bank accounts or property deeds, but the ones we imprint on the hearts and minds of those who come after us. Our turnip Christmas has become more than just a story, it's a philosophy, a way of approaching the world with gratitude, resilience, and openness to the unexpected gifts life offers. This brings me to an important question for each of us. What traditions are we creating in our own families that might seem strange to outsiders but carry deep meaning for us? What values are we encoding in our rituals and celebrations that might guide future generations long after we're gone? The turnip tradition teaches us that sometimes the most meaningful customs are the ones that challenge conventional wisdom, the ones that make us pause and consider what we're truly celebrating. In our modern culture of hypercommercialization and social media perfection, the turnips offer a refreshing perspective on what Christmas can and perhaps should be about. They remind us that the most precious moments aren't the ones that look perfect on Instagram, but the ones that touch our hearts and connect us to something larger than ourselves. They teach us that sometimes the greatest gifts are the ones that initially seem like mistakes but ultimately reveal themselves to be profound lessons in disguise. As we navigate the complexities of modern life, with its environmental challenges, economic uncertainties, and social divisions, the turnip tradition offers a vision of abundance that is not based on extraction but on appreciation, not on accumulation but on connection, not on consumption but on conservation. It asks us to consider what we're truly celebrating during this holiday season, not just the exchange of gifts, but the exchange of values, not just the gathering of people, but the connection of hearts, not just the marking of time, but the making of meaning. So I leave you with this challenge: as you approach this holiday season, consider what unexpected gifts might be speaking to you. What values do you most want to pass on to future generations? How might you create traditions that nourish the spirit rather than fill the closet? Remember that the most meaningful celebrations are often the ones that challenge us to look deeper, to appreciate more, and to find joy in the unexpected gifts that life offers to all who are willing to see them. The turnip Christmas has taught us that sometimes the most profound celebrations are the ones that don't follow the script, the ones that surprise us, the ones that make us question our assumptions about what matters. It has shown us that true abundance isn't found in having more, but in appreciating more, not in perfection, but in authenticity, not in the presents we receive, but in the presents we offer. As we carry these lessons forward, let us remember that the greatest gift we can give each other is not something that can be wrapped in paper, but something that nourishes the soul, connects the heart, and reminds us of what truly matters. Sometimes, these gifts come in the most unexpected packages that, once opened, reveal hidden treasures beyond our wildest imagination. And so, as the holiday season approaches, I invite you to consider what unexpected gifts might be waiting for you this Christmas, not under the tree, but in the moments of connection, in the conversations that matter, in the quiet reflections that bring clarity, in the acts of kindness that transform both giver and receiver. For in the end, the most precious gifts of Christmas are not the ones we can hold in our hands, but the ones we can hold in our hearts, gifts of love, wisdom, and understanding that grow richer with time and become more valuable with each passing year. This is the true magic of Christmas, the magic of connection, the wonder of presents, and the profound beauty of finding meaning in the unexpected gifts that life offers to all who are willing to see them. And this, I believe, is the greatest lesson of all, that sometimes, the most unusual gifts are the ones that ultimately teach us the most about what truly matters in life.